The name is Simon. It's your name for the moment and it resembles many emotions. Fear and anxiety, anger, want for revenge, despair, depression, curiosity, and many more. With that you'll be thrown into the game known as Cry of Fear. The journey will be unpleasant. In what way? Watch this review to find out. As I already said, the game's protagonist is Simon. You, as the player, don't know much about him, but you don't need that. You'll be curious and you'll be confused. However, don't worry about it. If there is one thing the game is really good at, it's storytelling. I stress Simon's name so much because he is just a close to perfect protagonist. He's one of the only 3 important characters in the game and carries the experience's whole weight on his shoulders. How? Everything begins when Simon gets into an accident which throws him into a cold and empty world. You'll spend the entire walkthrough with him and yet he doesn't become annoying. He just makes you think about what's really going on and worry about him. Simon's telling the story every moment, even when you think he isn't, with only 2 other characters to help him do that. You won't see those 2 very often, just enough to remind you of your purpose, enough to motivate you. And yet they help to surround you with the feeling of being alone in an empty place. These characters are written so well they just seamlessly blend with the world and become nothing more than a spice to Simon's story. It's not about them, it's about him, and as I said before, you won't understand his story at first. You're gonna be unknowingly absorbing it the entire time. The story is indivisible with the game's world. All the time, the environment will whisper and sometimes even shout its message in your ear. From the entertainment's perspective, it's fun. You'll visit dozens of locations including apartments, the city's streets, subway, sewers, or mental hospital. This scale is truly rich, and the design of the specific places is creative, non-repetitive, and most of the time easy to navigate. Unfortunately, just most of the time. Not often, but frequently enough to annoy me. I came across a section of the game I wasn't able to complete in a reasonable amount of time. Sometimes it was because of my stupidity, sometimes not. The cases where it was not my fault were usually connected with one common characteristic. A special game mechanic was badly explained or not explained at all. Here's an example. In the final part of the game there is a sequence in which you have to get through a maze. The catch? The location is flooded. You can't see anything and you drown. I died a lot before I found out that the random circles on the ground are there to indicate openings in the ceiling above them, which were otherwise not visible. For me, it was so difficult to make it through this sequence for multiple reasons. First of all, it was just the second instance of diving in Cry of Fear, and in the first one, the staged scenario worked completely differently. You had to dive under a well-lit short passage, so there was nowhere prior to the second time swimming where I could learn it. Second of all, the brightness settings simply didn't work. This gets me to the game's technical state, which is surprisingly good. It's true the game crashed a few times, but it happened only when it didn't affect my walkthrough, so I can't complain. And the main menu is awful. However, despite the game's release heading back up to 2012 and being a half-time mod, all the cogs run basically as they should. Just the inability to change brightness was really frustrating. Finally, third of all, when I found the hole in the ceiling, it often posed an unwanted challenge to enter it. I said unwanted not because I wouldn't like to face a fair, meaningful challenge, but because the controls and the player movement were not accurate and reliable. Not a problem for the rest of the game, a huge problem for accuracy-seeking gameplay. Now to a part which resembled a full-on hell and nothing close to just the slightest shadow of fun. Before you get to the final boss fight, you have to make it through an insanely hard parkour section. To jump to a higher platform, you have to press W, then press Shift, and then the space key, all of that on a very small space. And then you need to press the control key just before you reach the higher platform, and you have to stop moving right after you land safely, otherwise you will run off the edge on the other side. There are approximately 20 platforms, and you can lose all your progress at any point. So you have to execute this routine perfectly 20 times in a row. To make it even more annoying, your stamina depletes and refills the same way as it does in the rest of the game, which makes you wait 10 seconds after every 2 jumps. I have no idea why the developers decided it was a good idea to completely destroy the storytelling experience by creating this garbage, but they did, and I want to warn you, it doesn't matter what difficulty you're gonna choose. If you want to finish the game, you'll have to be very patient. Overall, parkour was more of an annoying mechanic, which is a pity, because the scenarios were good. It would just need some more movement and level design polishing to make it fluent. The game's major mechanics are melee fighting and gunplay. In the course of the game, Simon acquires more and more weapons, which are all quite unique and serve slightly different purposes. Shooting both builds an atmosphere, and is entertaining. As on one hand you want to spare ammo and not waste it more than necessary, but also when the time comes and a rushing enemy scares you, you'll have no other option than to unleash your survival instinct and shower it with a dozen of bullets. Quite contrary to most other horror games, Cry of Fear has no stealth and it doesn't affect the gameplay negatively at all. That doesn't mean you have to kill every enemy you see. You still should choose whether it's not better to run around them and dodge their attacks, as you do for example in Resident Evil 3 Remake. In my opinion, this works even better for Cry of Fear, because of the first-person view and the tension it creates. You're the one getting bitten if you fail to dodge an enemy, not a character on screen you don't really care about. Where Cry of Fear stays behind even the first Resident Evil game is the inventory system. Both games restrict the size of players' inventory to make the player decide what he can carry on him and what he has to leave behind. In Resident Evil, this is reinforced with crates located side by side with save stations which are connected. What you leave in one is in all of them. So for example, if you leave an item behind in order to carry something else, the game can force you to backtrack to a nearby crate if you need it later. But there is no such solution in Cry of Fear. And you don't know which weapons you'll need in the future and which will be forgotten. So if you carry an M16 instead of a shotgun, but then you get shotgun shells, but no M16 mags, you can't change your choice and return to a nearby crate. You might need to lose an hour of gameplay progress or more to start from a previous save. If you didn't override the save yet, I'm not complaining about the game being too hard now. If you must die, or if you must restart a game to find out something which is otherwise not obtainable information, and it's not a game meant to deeply enrage you, the mechanic or loop causing this is objectively badly designed. There are 2 more things about the inventory worth mentioning, with the first one being an option to assign quick slots to items to grab them fast, and the second one being the game doesn't pause when you open the inventory. That is mildly annoying in my opinion, but I have to admit this is rather a question of personal preference. I'd really like to stop complaining now, but there are 2 more issues I'd like to mention. You can't use the escape key to close an interaction window, which is not too important, but it gets very irritating throughout the game. Some cutscenes even after a save are unskippable. You have to watch them again and again. A beginner developer's mistake. Finally, let's praise the developers a bit again. The pacing is just right. You never get bored or overstimulated by action. That is accompanied by greatly chosen save locations. You sometimes pray for a tape recorder, which is used to save the game, so it builds the atmosphere and makes you value your life. But the saves are never too far away from each other. As I mentioned before, the developers are very creative. You get weapons which are truly different, multiple light sources which don't behave just the same, various enemy types, and so on. And except for the unfair parts I already talked about, the difficulty is well set. Easy is easy, medium is medium, hard is hard. Nothing to complain about here. As for the final rating, the game is free. It's longer than an average Resident Evil title and you could probably enjoy one more playthrough. Great bang for the buck. 5 out of 5. If you're a casual player, you'll enjoy the experience, but the game might be too long for you and there are quite some frustrating moments. 3 out of 5. You'll get a hard challenge you can face if that's what you're after, but not fair at all occasions. 4 out of 5. Graphics aren't beautiful, but they build an atmosphere, and if that's what you're after, You can play on easy difficulty and enjoy it. 2 out of 5. The story and characters are just great. Easy 5 out of 5. And finally, my overall rating 7 out of 10. Please, like to support me, subscribe to prove you mean it.